Hello, Croeso. Welcome to the Senedd Sources podcast, where we take you inside Welsh politics. I am Ollie Cole, and also with me on the pod, Joe Kiernan, former advisor to First Ministers Rhodri Morgan and Carwyn Jones. Before that, a journalist, and now at Cavendish Consulting. Good morning, Joe.
Morning, Ollie.
And also with us, as ever, Craig Lawton, who is a political advisor and candidate for the Welsh Conservatives, now working at Grasshopper Communications. Hello, Craig.
Hey, Ollie, how's it going?
Very, very well, thank you. Now, on the podcast today, a big budget week. Gill gets sentenced and we head into Leaflet Corner. And along the way, if you've got any questions or comments, we have a WhatsApp number. It's great for sending your comments over to us as you're listening. Then we'll read them out in the next episode. And we'll also use it when you come and join us for our live recordings as well. The number you need, 0333 404 6507. Start your message with the word Senedd, or you can email us with your questions and comments as well. The email address is hello@senedsources.com. And if you missed any of that, don't worry. It'll all be in the show notes on whatever screen you're currently staring at and listening to us on. And Joe and Craig, this is possibly the first time that you're actually speaking together, but not in the same room for quite a few days, isn't it? It's been a busy one for you two.
It's been a busy week, hasn't it, Craig?
Oh, yeah, well, busy generally. And then we seem to have bumped into each other twice in the space of a week, having, I think, only met. This sounds weird saying only met online, but having only met online for a long time. You know what I mean. We all know what we mean in this context. Don't read anything else into that. But yeah, we were both at the 70th anniversary of Cardiff being made the capital of Wales celebration last night, weren't we?
We were. Very lovely. Cardiff Castle, gleaming in the Christmas lights, and nice to celebrate, and really fascinating actually just to hear about the changes in Cardiff. I've lived in Cardiff since the mid-80s, on and off, apart from a stint in London, but the changes in the city, just amazing. So it was a lovely celebration.
Yeah, and as someone who genuinely has never lived in Cardiff, and I still don't, it's actually amazing the draw it has and the amount of change that's happened and the focus on how the city evolves as well and how it draws people in. I thought it was really interesting. So, yeah.
Very nice, very nice. And, I wasn't there, but I've been decorating and painting my hallways, so Cardiff Castle probably looks in better nick than my home at the moment. So there we go. Right, let's press on, because it has been a big political week. Of course, Rachel Reeves delivered her budget in Westminster with implications for Wales, of course. Joe, there was a bit of a funding boost through a few formulas for Wales, not sort of huge, but a little bit here and there. A lifting of the two-child cap, which will be a big win for a lot of Labour MPs, and mention of sort of AI investment zones and things like that. Take us through what you took away from actually it feels like a budget that's been talked about for longer than any other than I can remember.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that, because it just feels like we didn't actually learn that much new. Usually it's a massive occasion. You're sat there with your notebook and your pen. It felt a bit Groundhog Day-ish in a way. I mean, governments have always chosen to leak some aspects of their budget plans to test public reaction or prepare the ground. But dearie me, this just seems to have gone on for weeks and weeks, if not months. Lots of speculation, lots of leaks. We had that really bizarre press conference from the Chancellor at 8 o'clock in the morning to prepare us for tax increases, which they then rode back on. So too much kite flying for me, I think, and it took away from the occasion yesterday. Also, that OBR leak, Office of Budget Responsibility leak, really didn't help. And goodness me, what an embarrassment for them rather. But as you say, a bit of extra money for Wales. I think the big talking point this morning is the impact of the tax rises, such as they are, delayed pain really on the sort of tax raising policies. I think the big thing for me is the lifting of the two-child benefit cap. Obviously gone down massively, massively well with Labour members, both in Parliament and in the Senedd. And, you know, that's going to lift 26,000 Welsh children out of poverty, we're told, which is not insignificant by any means. But They promised growth when they came into government. The big question is, will any of this actually grow the economy? And also, we've talked a lot on this podcast about the cost of living crisis and standards of living. I just think we are in still for a very, very tough time, maybe for the rest of this decade. They obviously think there's going to be light at the end of the tunnel, but things really tough at the moment.
Mm. And Craig, I mean, there was almost sort of something for everyone to campaign on in this budget. You know, there was something for Plaid to bang the drum on about, you know, not getting served well enough as a Welsh economy. There's stuff for the Conservatives and Reform to bang about in terms of tax rises and the sort of growing welfare bill. And also, you know, Rachel Reeves, I think it was clearly a political move, knowing that those May elections are coming, to turn and mention quite a few Welsh Labour MPs as she reeled off, you know, things about investment, things about nuclear power, things about that two-child benefit cap. So you can really see the sort of leaflets and the general the local electioneering coming together from that budget, basically.
Yeah, I did. I did a bit of a trawl through of all the documentation from the budget first thing this morning. I did the good old Control F on the keyboard and typed in Wales, and Wales appears 97 times. And in comparison, and if we go back a few years, I think this would have been very different. I typed in renewable or equivalent of that just to see how many times renewables or renewable energy appeared. I think 14. Either way, significantly lower than you would previously have expected in years gone by. So I think we're seeing a shift in narrative. But yeah, I mean, May's election next year, we'd have been amazed if we hadn't seen, you know, various references, checks, and potentially giveaways from a Senedd, and let's be realistic, a Scottish election as well. I think what's interesting is if you combine the £505 million extra from Barnett and the 425 million, I think it is, additional borrowing powers, I am expecting someone in Welsh Labour to say pretty soon, we have essentially given Wales an extra almost £1 billion. That's what I expect to be used and referenced and campaigned in the coming weeks and months. And I guess, let's be realistic, if we do not have a Welsh Labour-led government in Cardiff next May, their backbenchers, their opposition members will be able to then say to whoever is in charge, you're able to do this because we've given you the extra money. That's what I expect to happen over the next year. Happy to be proved wrong, though, but let's wait and see.
Well, you know what I'm going to say now. I kind of think that there are subtle nuances to this, though, aren't they? Yes, the UK government says Welsh Government will get an extra 320 million or whatever it is to spend on day-to-day services, 185 million on infrastructure. So already the split between capital revenue, you know, is there. And in terms of our public services, for example, it's a lot of money. It's not a huge amount of money over the next 4 years. I think that the changes to how Welsh ministers can borrow in the future and how the reserves need to be kept or not kept, as it is in this case, is really interesting. I mean, the Treasury say it'll give ministers an extra 425 million to spend. But interestingly, I was listening to the finance minister and he was saying that some of this money is already allocated. Obviously, it'll be up to the next Welsh Government how that money will be spent. But for example, some of it is a Barnett formula consequential with regard to business rate relief scheme to kick in from next April. You know, you'd be brave as the incoming government next May not to replicate what's happening across the border, given the pain that businesses in Wales are going through at the moment with wage bills, energy bills, all of the rest of it. So, yeah, I think there's less wriggle room than you might imagine.
It's interesting, though, because Mark Drakeford has also said in previous months he's leaving headroom as well. So he's kind of going in both directions on that, would you say?
I think that he knew that in terms of getting his own budget through, that he would need some headroom. It's a decent amount of money. This will obviously mean that there's further money, which could be added on top of that, not sort of, the bald figures that were given out yesterday. But I think, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how those discussions are going on in terms of the Welsh Government budget, and just how high people are aiming in those budget discussions.
And there's a big thing about timing always in these budget discussions, Craig, because a lot of what was announced by Rachel Reeves yesterday, sort of hinges upon a government reining in a decent amount of spending almost in an election year, which, as we all know, is very unlikely. It doesn't tend to be a time when governments are deciding to sort of, tighten their belt and say not as much for you, general public, but please vote for us anyway. And all political parties sort of have this problem, do this problem, play this trick. It's sort of a well-known Treasury trick to sort of push things back by the end of 5 years. But it is an issue when it comes to actually how much of an impact people feel from that budget by the time they go into any sort of ballot box, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, you look at various things that are included in the budget. Just some examples. I don't necessarily agree with the proposed tax on EV vehicles per mile, but that's been proposed from 2028. There's been a freeze on, my mind goes blank, something, and fuel duty, is it, until autumn next year. So actually, already we're getting a lot of caveats as to when things are going to actually be brought in, when they're going to happen, and even what those things will look like. Let's just use an example of, I think the wording was, we're going to work with everybody to come up with a plan and a funding structure to support the Cardiff Parkway development. Fantastic. But what does that actually look like? Who's going to do what? When is it going to happen? There's a lot of discussion in there. I thought another interesting one is there was talk around improving access to grid connectivity and speeding things up, but no actual money given there. A discussion about what's going to happen, when, who. We don't know what all that means. I guess my observation would be, though, that despite all of the news we've had around changes in tax and things, there's no one massive headline that has sort of grabbed people's attention and gone, I am outraged because of X. And the best example I can give you, and it was such a silly one, under George Osborne, the pasty tax, as it became known. It was just so utterly bizarre. And I remember knocking doors in a local election, and it was just after the pasty tax, and people were talking to me about pasties and sausage rolls on the door. And I mean, I guess, we'll wait to see whether Labour activists are getting people talking to them about milkshakes and lattes. It doesn't seem to have hit in the same way, because obviously it's for a different reason. It's from a health perspective, they would argue.
I do think, though, that when you've got organisations like the Resolution Foundation saying this is the biggest stealth tax rise, and that the average worker is going to be, 1,400, 1,500, whatever pounds that it said, worse off by 2030 because of the frozen thresholds. That's haymaking for the Conservatives supplied for reform, isn't it? And so there wasn't anything specific in it to make people think, I'm going to be better off. I'm going to feel it as I'm sat in my lounge or around my dining table.
That's true. I guess the difference is, I can't believe I'm saying this, but, I guess it is the fact, unfortunately, things aren't good anyway. It's not like the government is turning things around and making people's lives awful when they were great before. People don't think everything is rosy at the moment anyway. And so, don't get me wrong, it's not an excuse. I think it plays into Reform's hands and Plaid Cymru's hands more than anybody, because they are opposition of not being in government. But, people don't think it's great at the moment anyway. And I think they just look at it and feel that it's a continuation. And it's a continuation going back to that narrative that Reform use of the old parties doing the same, not having an impact, not making people's lives better, I would argue.
And actually, Rachel Reeves, yesterday in her press conference following the budget, couldn't rule out, like she did last year, coming back for more in the future if she needed it. And then you can sort of see that appearing on leaflets and campaign slogans pretty quickly. And, if you're Rachel Reeves, I suppose you don't want to hamstring yourself again like you did sort of last year and see that things change underneath you. But not being able to rule out more doesn't necessarily give much steadiness. And when actually, we've seen that this morning in a vote in the Senedd where they've rejected that budget. It doesn't really have any implications necessarily for the Welsh Government, but opposition parties sort of joined up to basically say, we don't like what the UK government is doing in terms of the budget, which gets us on, I suppose, to the way parties are talking about spending here in Wales, Craig. And there is still a lot of wrangling over what the Senedd budget looks like, what the political support for what Welsh Labour are doing at the moment looks like, and how much control they've got over the Senedd in the run-up to May.
Yeah, I think this is the first demonstration we've had of the headache and the issues that Welsh Labour in government are going to have to deal with over the next almost 6 months. It's the first real debate, first real motion, first real vote we've had with them not having any kind of a workable majority. And if nothing else, it was a shot across the bows that your life, Welsh Government, is going to be very difficult from a chamber perspective for the next 6 months. That would be my observation, because realistically, as we all know, the motion is symbolic. It's a good headline. It's a reiteration of where the parties stand. It doesn't have any direct impact, but actually it sends a very clear message to the First Minister and the Cabinet that they are going to have to start working hard.
I don't think they were under any illusions about that at all, to be fair. And I do think that, why would the opposition parties not get together to put this motion down? As you say, it's symbolic. I don't think anything I've heard from the First Minister and the Finance Minister in the last few months actually would suggest they think there's going to be anything easy about the next 6 months, whether that's legislation, whether that's getting their budget through. But we are in that final 6 months heading into the Senedd election, and the opposition parties are going to do whatever they can to make life uncomfortable at the very least. And that's what we saw.
I think it's interesting though, isn't it? Because you've got this weird situation where different parties and individual independent MSs, as well as the single Lib Dem, are looking at having discussions around what they want from the Welsh Government budget, potential negotiations and discussions around deals, at the same time essentially saying they don't like what they're doing and they're voting against them. So it's an interesting situation. I don't think it will have any impact on the negotiation, but it sends a strange message to the public, I say, that at 1 minute you're opposing the money they've been given or the changes that we're seeing, but at the same time you still want to get around the table and have a chat about what you can get from it. I think it's an interesting angle.
Well, on those meetings, I know we chatted to Rhina Bjorweth a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, and Joe, you picked up with him with regards Plaid Cymru having those budget talks with the Welsh Government. At the time, he sort of skirted around the issue, and then you asked him pretty directly whether he'd had a meeting or the Plaid Cymru finance spokesperson had a meeting with Mark Drakeford yet. He said, no, I haven't had a meeting, and I don't think meetings have taken place as such. Well, for the first time on this podcast, we can say our Senedd sources are actually telling us this week that I understand that Plaid Cymru have actually gone in for those talks now. So those talks are live, and the first sort of range of discussions regarding what that Welsh budget might look like in terms of getting Plaid support over the line have taken place. Now, we've gone to Plaid Cymru on this. They won't confirm it, but we've got it from a fairly solid source within the Senedd. And Joe, that's interesting, because what you were saying to Reen a little while ago, he sort of said, well, everyone's getting het up about the budget, but, it's not really that big a deal. Everything is going to be fine. I don't want any part of it. And now we can see that Plaid Cymru are bending a little bit and starting to take part in that sort of quite live discussion.
I think it's really interesting that someone who has never been in government will say the budget's not a big deal. It's a huge deal. Your government falls if you can't pass your budget. It is kind of the linchpin. So let's just sort of like duck that one for the minute. We've said this before. The Welsh Government budget will face automatic cuts if they cannot get a vote through on their spending plans. Both the Tories and Plaid Cymru have said in the past that no one wants that situation to occur. I think Rhys Purweth actually said to us, no one wants to see the budget fall. So from that, I took that talks would start fairly imminently. Now, I've said before that I didn't think that the Tories were terribly serious in their approaches to budget discussions, and I thought that they would cost too much anyway. We know that Jane Dodds from the Liberal Democrats has had a meeting. So too has the independent MS Russell George. So Mark Drakeford was on the radio this morning, funnily enough, and he said that I'm keeping all my irons in the fire. I'll talk to anyone who will rock up and talk to me. He sounds more confident, I think, of getting a deal through. We'll have to wait and see. We know what the Conservatives are asking for. As you say, Plaid seem to be being a bit coy about what their discussions or how they're unfolding and what they're asking for. But I think it's just a mature position to take this close to Christmas and this close to needing to find a way through this, that actually everyone's being a bit more grown up and having some chats about it.
Going back to what Reen said in response to your question, Joe, I thought there was something up at that point, because if you look at the question you asked Reen and the answer that he gave, they spoke to different things. You asked Reen, are you or any of your team or your shadow finance people having conversations about the budget? And Reen's response was, I have not had any discussions. Those are two different things.
Neither had his finance spokesperson at that point.
But I thought he was very
either.
careful that he had not had any discussions.
Yeah. And but it goes, doesn't it? It speaks to that thing about politics, which you'll know, Joe, and you'll know, Craig, which is, at times like this, if, for example, a budget falls, a government, can't get its money out, can't operate, most members of the public think, oh my gosh, can't, that room of people just get their heads together for the good of this country and sort it out. And obviously there's the reality, there's the realpolitik of it all, and everyone wants their sort of little piece of the cake and to run away with and say, see what I've secured. But, most members of the public, if all of these discussions are swirling, are looking at, say, Plaid Cymru, maybe reform, saying, okay, you want to form the next government, you want to be in charge of this country, you've got to act responsibly.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that the general public just wouldn't be able to understand. And we've talked about the budget. We've talked about the problems that people are facing in their everyday lives. A bunch of 60 politicians sat in that nice building in Cardiff Bay, not being able to find a way through this. It would damage every single person in there. And that's why I've always been quite optimistic about finding a way through. And look, it might be that Plaid, this close to an election, really don't want to do a deal. They don't want to be the party that does it. But there are other options with Jane Dodds and Russell George, the independent MS, for example. At least the Welsh Government have options. If I was Plaid, I'd secure something. I'd secure something that was one of my sort of like biggie pledges, so that they can hit the ground running next year. Because I think that's the other thing about the incoming government. They will come in with lots of spending plans. They won't all be able to be implemented. Rachel Reeves told us yesterday how much more money we're going to have in total for spending plans in Wales. But some of the big ticket items are multi hundreds of millions. To enact your programme of government, your manifesto, you also need to look at where you're going to be cutting funding from existing programmes. That can't be done overnight. So if I was Rhys Purweth and Plaid Cymru, I'd be wanting a little pocket of cash to be sat there so I can hit the ground running with one of my top 5 pledges or whatever.
It's one of the points, isn't it, that Reen has kind of skirted around when we asked him, and others have asked him this, are your plans costed? And if they are costed, how are you going to pay for them? What are you going to cut? And all he'll say, and I don't blame him, all he'll say is, those are fully costed. But as you say, there has to be, if you put extra in somewhere, you have to see a reduction somewhere else, unless you come up with something pretty radical. as we've talked about, I don't think we're going to see anything that radical from Plaid Cymru in the next 6 months. So, yeah, at the end of the day, it comes down to how do you spin it? How do you spin what you've got out of things? If you do a really bad job, you end up like the Lib Dems from the coalition government with David Cameron. If you do a really good job, you can demonstrate how actually you've held Welsh Government's feet to the fire. You've got what you wanted, and you're now in a position to move forward as government and do everything you want to do. Easier said than done.
It goes from the sublime to the ridiculous. And forgive me if I'm repeating this. I can't remember if I've shared this story before, but I do remember a budget negotiation round where there was a small cohort of Lib Dems in the Lib Dem group at that point, and they all got to sort of put something into the pot. For one member, it was a new road sign that cost £50,000 for a theatre in his patch. He will have put that on his election leaflets. He will have been chuffed to bits with it. So listen, it can be all manner of things.
Absolutely. And also the politicking of this, for the danger for the other parties, is actually, if the Welsh Government budget falls, it's another sort of string to reform's bow. Those parties can't get it done. We're the people who'll get it done. And there is a political danger in that, if you are Plaid Cymru, if you are Labour and the Welsh Government, and also the Lib Dems and those independents as well. You've got to sort of try and hold firm against that kind of messaging, which will be really ramped up over the next 6 months. And similarly, as we all know, we don't know the makeup of the next Welsh government and the Senedd, but you've got to play ball in some way, because you might be needing some help fairly quickly yourself. So it's at least good to keep some people on side along the way. Well, there's lots more to come. We are going to be talking about the case of Nathan Gill, and also some leaflets have started dropping through our doors. So we're going to take a look at those. Remember to subscribe on your podcast app. You can watch us on YouTube as well. Just search for Senedd Sources, where we upload full episodes for you to enjoy. And WhatsApp us as you're listening. Comments, questions, send us a voice note so we can play it on next week's episode if you like. 0333 404 6507 is the number you need. Start your message with the word Senedd, and we will be right back. This is the Senedd Sources podcast. Thanks for being with us today. I am Ollie Cole. We're with Joe Kiernan and Craig Lawton as ever. And quite a substantial piece of Welsh political news in the last week or so that sort of led UK headlines as well as Welsh headlines, and that was the sentencing of Nathan Gill. And because he pled guilty, Joe, it was the first time we'd actually heard a lot of the detail in terms of what we know now about what he was getting up to, the cash payments, what he was being asked to do along the way. And it's a sort of startling story. The more you read, the more you think this sounds utterly absurd, don't you?
Yeah, no, it's kind of like if you read it in a novel, you would question it, wouldn't you? You'd go, oh, come off, far-fetched. But
feels like a Nadine Dorries book, maybe. Sorry,
never
go on, Joe. Go on.
Never read one, so sorry.
I do have a confession to make there. My mother-in-law did buy me a Nadine Dorries book from a charity shop, fortunately.
Shame of it, Craig.
Yeah, it's next to a Boris Johnson book, weirdly. But yeah, we have Christmas reading that we're going to talk about at some point near the time, I'm sure. But no, go back to your serious point.
Oh my Lord, I can't get my mind off Nadine Dorries' books now. But no, if you were reading this as some kind of spy thriller, you'd kind of like, come on. But, the text messages about Christmas gifts. And the other thing that really struck me was we're talking about £40,000. And you kind of think, in your right mind, would you think that accepting £40,000 in bribes was worth it on the basis that you could end up 10.5 years in jail? I just find it extraordinary. And obviously, it's a much wider issue because Nigel Farage has been put on the spot lots of times about what he knew. Did he not have any inkling? He said he's a bad man. He's a traitor. We knew nothing about it. But I think it raises legitimate questions about the other people that Nathan Gill embroiled in some of the functions that they attended with him, etc. And even if there's absolutely no wrongdoing, it just still leaves that perception. And I thought it was really fascinating this week that Keir Starmer challenged Nigel Farage to set up an investigation into Russian links with Reform UK. You had Ed Davey then taking great delight in talking about Nigel Farage's comments on Vladimir Putin, for example, the fact that he'd worked for Russia today, questioning his loyalties. And then I was quite surprised, to be honest, that it got raised in the Senedd too. The Conservative leader, Darren Miller, asked the First Minister if she shared his disgust with, what Nathan Gill had done, reiterating some of the stuff that came out in that sentencing hearing and the actual sentence itself, and saying that reform is a risk to our national security. For Lyned Morgan, the FM, to then go on saying we're talking with the UK government, the security services, the police and all of this, to make sure we don't see political interference when it comes to the Senedd election next May, was quite extraordinary. And I just think this is going to bite reform in the bum for some time to come.
Yeah, it's interesting. We haven't seen any Wales-specific polling, but we have seen, I think, some polling in the last couple of days UK-wide, and it's the first drop I think we've seen in Reform's polling in about 6 months. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how much of an impact that has and how long it goes on for, I guess. I think what's really interesting, just a few thoughts that I drew out from this. I make nothing of this. I just think it's interesting. For accepting those bribes, Nathan Gill has received a prison sentence double the length of the time that he was an elected representative, which I just think is amazing and interesting. Don't get me wrong, I'm saying it's perfectly justified. I guess from his perspective, he would look back and go, what the hell was I doing? What I guess he'd look at that and say, what was the benefit? And genuinely, from the public perspective, you'd ask, irrespective of anything else, you're a politician that is being paid very well to do your job. Why can't you do your job? What else do you possibly need to do? And why do you need more money? Before we even start discussing the questions around links directly with Russia and other things, I just think it's bizarre.
How do you get out of a sticky wicket like that, Joe? You've probably been there, not necessarily in a case like that, but in terms of, politicians behave badly. Some of them end up in court, some of them end up in prison. Humans are humans in a way, but there's always a sort of party political nature to this. Now, Nigel Farage has said that Nathan Gill, sort of ancient history, he was Welsh Reform leader, quite a while back, and also the Reform UK party has said that it was reprehensible, treasonous, doesn't want to be associated with it. But we know, the information is a matter of public record that, Nathan Gill sat alongside a lot of people who now represent the Reform Party, were then the Brexit Party and UKIP before that. We know there's no evidence that anyone else has done any wrongdoing in this case. However, we know that Nathan Gill did invite other MEPs, other people from his party to meetings, to events that had quite a pro-Russian slant. Rupert Lowe, the MP for Yarmouth, has been saying that just recently. And we know from experts on sort of Russian intelligence here in the UK that new parties in particular are susceptible to, foreign interference and being foreign targets. Now, how do you deal with the idea that one of your number has done something unbelievably bad? You don't want to be aligned with it in any way, but also it seems Reform don't want to necessarily own it in any way.
And I think that's the big problem, not owning it. They can say he's a traitor, they can say it's bad behaviour, but there have been a few missteps along the way, I think. So, for example, Nigel Farage saying, hardly knew him. Just not credible, I'm afraid. Just not credible. You sat next to him in the European Parliament. There are photos all over the place. I was listening to a fabulous radio documentary the other day with lots of archive stuff of Nigel Farage and Nathan Gill. Clearly very close. Nathan Gill accompanying him to lots of stuff as his right-hand man. Own it. Say that you were close and you're utterly shocked by what's happened. Don't try and deny it. We've had other senior party members of Reform saying, never met him. patently lying because there's photographic evidence. Tice was in some event with a student union this week, got absolutely lambasted by some of the young people there because he reiterated this, I didn't know him, never met him, and they're saying, I've got the photos on my phone, do you want me to show you? So own it. I think that Nigel Farage has also said in this last week, I'm not investigating it. I'm not the police. Well, I'm sorry. It might work with your mates down the pub. It's not credible as a party leader, as someone who is viewing himself and putting himself forward as a potential next Prime Minister. And he was saying we don't have the money to have some kind of investigation. There are things they could do within the party structures to give some reassurance to the public, I think. But simply trying to bat it off constantly, change the narrative. He's not been successful in the time since this became public, and he's not going to be successful if he carries on with the same refrain.
And Craig, we know from the Cardiff by-election and what was coming up on the doors there in terms of Llyr Powell and his connections to Nathan Gill in his sort of previous roles, that it did hit through with the public. People did start noticing it on social media. People did start noticing it. Now, there's no justification for how far perhaps it went in the case of Llyr Powell in terms of Llyr is an innocent party and an innocent man and received a lot of threats. But we know that this stuff does feed in to the sort of the public mind, and we also know from our chat with Kai from Reform last week that the party is in its sort of final stages of getting its new leader together. Now, that person, whether they like it or not, will be a successor to Nathan Gill, and so will almost certainly face this question pretty quickly and have to sort of work out what path they're going to tread for the rest of the campaign run.
Yeah, I would almost argue when it comes to looking at people like Llyr and other candidates going forward, we assume Llyr will be a candidate in next year's election. Actually, one of the best things, arguably, that Reform could do to try and support them and help them is carry out an investigation, because it demonstrates they are taking this seriously. As Joe said, if you want to be in government, they want to be in government in Westminster, they want to be in government in Cardiff Bay, you need to be taken seriously by the general public. And actually a good way of protecting your candidates and your activists, I would argue, and giving them something to positively say on the doorstep is taking this really seriously, and we are going to carry out a full investigation, and an investigation is being carried out. I think that's the only way you can try and move forward with it.
And just to butt in there, sorry, but, this line, we've got no money to investigate, the one thing that they're not short of compared with the other parties at the moment is money. Doesn't wash.
Well, in fact, there was a press release dropped into my inbox just this morning about how much they'd put into their pre-budget advertising and press conferences and campaigns, and hitting the £1 million mark, I think. So there is, it's about political will in these situations, and I think the public always sort of, it's the old thing that actually a lot of people think they can get away with stuff in public, but the public are a lot more clever in terms of reading when politicians are sort of speaking out both sides of their mouth than often they realise. Well, on Reform, we had a huge notification come through this week that something had dropped on Craig Lawton's letterbox. I happened to have opened my Instagram this morning, looked on someone's story, and someone else that I know has received some Reform UK literature ahead of the Senedd election. They are also called Craig, so I'm unsure whether they are only targeting people called Craig at this stage in the election cycle. But Craig, take us through.
Not.
Oh,
Ollie,
there we go.
I've
there
had
we go.
one too.
Joe's got one as well. There we go. So it's Craig's and Joe's at least. Maybe they're just aiming for this podcast specifically.
I don't want to ruin your entire pitch and intro there, Ollie, and maybe it's a Freudian slip, but I've actually received something from the Conservatives this week and not Reform. I have seen some things from Reform online. I think others have received the same thing that you have
they'd have been
received,
better
Joe.
off sending the leaflet they sent me to you, frankly.
What are you trying to say?
Waste of a stamp.
Well, there we go. I must have got my WhatsApps mixed up among the painting and decorating. But well, let's go through then. Joe, what's on the Reform leaflet, and Craig, what's on the Conservative leaflet, and we will create a leaflet corner here on Senedd Sources as we head towards the election. So, Craig, kick us off.
Can we have a jingle for leaflet corner? Is that? I'm just asking to the producers that sit in the background. I don't know if we've got budget for that. Maybe a jingle would be nice. So yeah, I actually really surprised that I got home last night and I had a leaflet on my doorstep from Adam Robinson, who is the Conservative lead candidate for Pontypridd, Cynnon, Merthyr, which is the super constituency that my wife and I live in. I'm not actually that surprised to have received this. And the reason I say that is that we live in the only Conservative ward in that entire council area. So actually, it's a really good demonstration of how important your councillors and your activists are when it comes to getting your message out there. We've not received anything from Labour. We've not received anything from Plaid Cymru yet. Labour very rarely target our ward, or very rarely do well in our ward. So I'm not actually surprised we haven't received anything from them. But going away from why we've received this, the bit that really caught my eye, and I think this is really interesting, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the coming weeks and months, is there is a third of this leaflet saying 13% wins make it count for the Welsh Conservatives. Under the new Senedd PR system, you only need 13% to get a member of the Senedd. And then there's a little, I wouldn't go as far as saying Lib Dem-esque bar graph, but there's a little bar graph trying to give across how, Party A can get 2, Party B can get 2, Party C, the Conservatives can get 1, and Party D can also get 1. So I'm fascinated that it has been used. I'm not actually that surprised because I think it's important, and I think people need to understand the system that they have, and breaking it down into a really simple, easily understandable sort of message, I think is going to be really important. I'm really fascinated to see if this message continues from the party and if it continues from other parties. I recall, I'm trying to think now, 2016, I think, when I was a candidate, we had a leaflet then as Welsh Conservatives that said Labour only need to lose 1 seat to lose control of the Senedd. And they did some focus group work, I believe, and they found out that worked really well in certain areas. Obviously, it didn't work well in areas where the Lib Dems or Plaid Cymru were doing well, but it did work well where Labour was the target. And so I'd be interested to know how they've come up with this choice of wording, but also if we're going to see it from other parties, because I think it is going to be so important. And being realistic, Joe, we've talked about this before, it's going to be an important message for Labour. It may not have been in years gone by, but this election, with polling as it is, it's going to be really important that message comes across for them as well.
Yeah, agree, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but I'm interested because 13% figures, but you won't like that so much, this one. 13% figures in the Reform leaflet that I've had, but talking about the political earthquake where the Labour and the Conservatives combined received just 13% of the vote in Caerphilly. So 13 is the number of the day. This leaflet is very much, they're sticking to their slogans, aren't they? The old system is broken, legacy of 26 years of Labour rule, shameful, and Plaid is even worse than Labour. It's really interesting. They're really trying to go at Plaid, aren't they, with their associations with Labour in supporting budgets, etc. in the past. I mean, lots of people have had these. Lots of people I know in Labour, in Plaid, for example. So you've got to question their targeting. I don't think that their voter data is very good. The interesting thing is that they want you to return this. You get a prepaid envelope. Goodness knows how much all of this it's costing. But there's a little kind of questionnaire on the back, and it asks you to tick the box of what issues are most important to you. NHS waiting lists, cost of living crisis, mass immigration, high energy prices, 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, rising street crime, attacks on free speech. Geared to where they think their support is. I would love to know how much this exercise is costing them and how much they've wasted on people like me.
I thought it was really interesting. So when you shared the copy of that leaflet, Joe, on WhatsApp, what's jumped out to me is that actually that leaflet and that style of questioning and that questionnaire and that data gathering was really similar to what I remember the Conservatives using under the time when Lynton Crosby was leading the campaign. It was very data driven. It was very, very targeted, to the point of which you were looking at individual, I think they're called mosaic codes, and individual demographics street by street on some basis. They would get slightly different things, and you would gather all this data and then come up with an algorithm. And I don't know how all the magic worked. I don't know who is leading that campaign, but it feels very reminiscent to those Lynton Crosby campaigns. I don't know, Joe, if that's a similar style of leaflet to the kind that Labour have ever distributed, if actually it's something everyone uses, or I don't know.
I mean, occasionally, but I think this is about more, because they don't have voter data from the past. They're trying to identify those households that they can then door knock, get them out on polling day next May. But also, the other interesting thing that happened this week, Ollie, was that Reform had a big, very glitzy, very well produced rally in Llandudno in the week. And I don't know what you both think, but it felt to me like it was a bit of a kind of show and tell for their leadership shortlist. Now, we were told in our recent interview with the Reform spokesperson that, the new leader would be announced soon. Nigel Farage actually said at the rally that it would be after Christmas, so we're going to have to hold our breath for a little while longer. But just interesting that, Llŷr Powell, ex-Tory MP David Jones, ex-Tory MS, now Reform AS, Laura Ann Jones, all doing their little spiel, all in their sort of best bib and tucker. And it just felt to me, was this the kind of final, or one of the final tests for those people who are on that shortlist?
It is interesting that I'll be interested to see what the leaflets from Reform actually look like after that announcement, because I know that Nigel Farage adorns the Reform leaflets pretty consistently and did in the council elections just recently, but they got into a bit of trouble because basically all the local candidates said that we'll be cutting council tax. That, according to Reform, wasn't something that was sanctioned from Reform HQ, but basically, if your candidates did get elected on that promise, and Nigel Farage's face was next to them. So it'll be interesting to see, Craig, whether that picture switches, or sort of how big those pictures are of Nigel Farage compared to the new Reform leader. What did you make of that sort of fashion show, as Joe puts it, of the leadership potential contenders? I mean, you've got one actual sort of elected MS there, but is sort of never far away from the headlines. David Jones is an interesting name. Was it sort of not that interesting when it turned out that he'd become a member and he sort of ruled out standing in any way, but actually he ruled out becoming an MP again, if I recall correctly. So that might be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so I wasn't surprised when, however many months ago now it was, David Jones, it had come out, had joined Reform. I wasn't that surprised when he talked down the idea of standing for them, because as far as I looked at that as a case of him almost laying the groundwork for him being convinced that he should actually stand. And I'm wondering whether we'll see an about turn from him. What I thought was interesting is that this is not the only occasion this week that David Jones has been stood up in a suit and tie in front of the membership. You've talked about leaflet focusing, but I seem to, it may just be because we're talking about them a lot, I seem to have had an awful lot of Reform type stuff popping up on my Facebook feed over the last week. And David Jones was also speaking at a local members event. And it was really interesting that he has suddenly popped up and become more of a speaker as opposed to just a background person or a name that is spoken of. So, yeah, I would expect Llŷr to be speaking at that conference. I would expect Laura Ann to be speaking at that conference. The fact that David Jones is the new name, he is also a former Secretary of State. He has sat around the cabinet table. And let's not forget, some considerable time ago, he was also for a short period of time an Assembly member, as it was then as well. He is exactly the kind of person you would assume that Reform will want to say, this is someone that has experience, knows what they're doing, and stands up for, you'd assume, their values. He is going to be our leader. That is what I expect them to say.
Yeah,
I would be amazed if it's someone else.
I just think that when it comes down to brass tacks, he is the only person, if I was interested enough, I'd put a bet on, but he would be my choice. But I think that's
I don't think any of us are doing political betting, let's put it that way.
Not with the trouble that we've seen already in that regard in the past. But I do think that it's the experience which is key for me, because I was thinking back to the setting up of the Senedd, and, you had people in Plaid, you had people in Labour who'd been in Parliament, transferred over. The notion that should reform find themselves in the position of governing, that they would have people who have no experience at all at any level of government. I know there'll be some councillors, but, so I think that David Jones knows the lay of the land. If they can persuade him, and maybe they have already persuaded him.
I would say the only sticking point for them is that, as far as I'm aware, David still is not a fan of devolution and does not agree with the Senedd, as far as I'm aware. That always used to be his general position, if I'm paraphrasing that. So again, that'll be interesting to see whether his opinion changes or whether their policy changes. Because as we talked about a few weeks ago, Reform have talked about the fact that they are pro-devolution and they do want to keep the Senedd in place. We heard that from Kai a couple of weeks ago as well. So are we going to see a change in Reform policy, or are we going to see a change in David Jones's personal opinion? I don't know.
I would probably, given the fact that not long ago he thought the Conservatives were the best people to run the country, and now he thinks the Reform are the best people to run the country, I would say his position probably becomes more flexible than the party's. But we'll see how we get on. Listen, thank you very much, Joe, and thanks, Craig. All of that was utterly wild speculation, but what else are we here to do? That was excellent. So if you want to hear more of that, and maybe we'll get an answer in the coming weeks, do press subscribe on your podcast app, and you can find us to watch on YouTube as well. We will drop into your feeds every week with the latest on Welsh politics and policy making. You will not miss a thing here on Senedd Sources. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again next week.